We've got a lot of questions, of course, before Pesach, so I think I'll just go straight into the first one, other than to say, please, everyone, stay muted, unless I ask you otherwise. The first question is anonymous. He says, I have a large amount of protein powder processed from rice, a nutritional supplement. The ingredients are 86% rice, dextrose, scent and flavoring, silicon dioxide to prevent clumping. Under the allergies alert suggestion, i.e. items that are likely found, there are many nuts and seeds listed along with wheat and oats. Is this considered food or non-food? Does it matter? May I keep possession of this product during Pesach and use it after Pesach, or must I throw it out?
Very well. First of all, this protein powder is considered a food. It is something which is designed to be eaten. People do in fact eat it. It's not difficult or something which people are revolted by, etc. So it's definitely a food. The problem here, of course, is not the rice, but the dextrose is a problem, because dextrose may, I stress, may be made of haAtzma'ut. Dextrose can be made from various things. It doesn't have to be haAtzma'ut, but it can be, and frequently is. It is sometimes derived from wheat, in which case it is definitely a haAtzma'ut derivative. For that reason, one may not keep it in his possession during Pesach, because the likelihood of it being dextrose of a haAtzma'ut origin is actually quite high. It depends on which country the dextrose was produced and other factors which we cannot possibly relate to and discuss here. So either one can somehow ascertain precisely what this dextrose is made of, where it was manufactured, etc., which is a difficult thing to do usually. Or one has to assume that it is very possibly haAtzma'ut and get rid of it. By the way, the other substances mentioned here, such as flavoring. Flavoring is a very vague term, of course, and frequently in such additives described on the ingredients as flavoring, there are also definitely haAtzma'ut-based derivatives. So the simple answer is one may not keep it in his possession during Pesach.
Thank you very much, Harav. The next question is a combination of two questions. One was submitted by Hava Hope and one was anonymous. Should we dispose of vinegar, acetic acid, or food items containing them? What if the ingredients do not specify the origin?
Well, generally, one has to know that white distilled vinegar may, and in fact is likely to be made from malt or a type of yeast, which is, or a type of vinegar which is based on yeast or enzymes made from haAtzma'ut. This is with regards to white distilled vinegar. As opposed to this, one should know that, so therefore all malt, anything which contains malt vinegar, or anything that is likely to be malt vinegar, or based in some way on malt extract, is to be considered haAtzma'ut, and one may not keep it, it may not be eaten, and it also may not be kept in one's possession during Pesach. Most vinegar products, as opposed to specifically the white distilled vinegar that we spoke of, most vinegar products do not use haAtzma'ut-based alcohol in their production, because most vinegars, or many vinegars, are distilled from alcohol, and therefore generally they can be used on Pesach. But because of the possibility of various parts of the manufacturing process not being known to us, it is recommended, highly recommended, that one purchase and use on Pesach a vinegar which is officially certified as kasher Pesach.
Thank you. I don't think Hava is on the call, so we'll move on to the next one from Lewis Gordon. Does and this is a similar question. Does commercial 100% corn alcohol require a special Pesach hechsher if it was prepared before Chag?
It does require a special hechsher. The reason for this, again, is not the corn itself, which of course is kitniyot, but that's a separate discussion, but it's not haAtzma'ut, clearly. But the fact of the matter is that in the manufacturing process, there is something called initialization. Even when the alcohol is derived from a non-chametz substance such as corn, nevertheless, in the initialization process, sometimes chametz-based products such as malts are used to break down the starch, etc. And therefore, it does require hechsher for Pesach.
Great, thank you very much.
I would add actually one more thing, and that is that for this reason, or it's not the same reason, but it's related, certain alcoholic beverages that are distilled, not like whiskey, which is distilled from barley, shall we say, which is clearly, actually it's not so clear, it's a big mahloket, but we're assuming and we're accepting the position that whiskey is to be considered chametz or karovet chametz. If an alcoholic beverage is produced from a grain or a substance which is not one of the 5 grains, such as corn, there is still a problem. Because usually in the manufacturing process, the distilling process, barley water that was used for the manufacture of chametz alcohol or some chametz-based alcoholic beverage is then used, the water, it's just water, but it was water that was steeped in some way in barley or malt. And therefore, even an alcoholic beverage which is labeled as being made from corn or rice or something like that may have such chametz based water, so to speak, if you want to call it that. It's called has a term in the distillation process. It's the backwater or something, the backset, and that's used in the process, and therefore all these things require hechsher.
Would one be required to dispose of that as well, or is the amount small enough that you don't have to?
That's actually very difficult to answer categorically. I would say I'm not in favor of selling hametz as a rule, but for such things as this, where there's a very serious safek, whether there's any problem, for such things I would say such products which are a safek rahok, an unlikely thing, but there might be some problem, those things are probably best sold, just to be safe.
Okay, thank you. We now have a question from Chaim Ginsberg. Are baking soda, baking powder, or yeast, including fresh, active, dry, and instant, considered hametz? And if not, do they require a Pesach hechsher to use them on Pesach?
Good question, which I'm asked every single year for decades now, I think. The definition of hametz is a dough or a mixture, an admixture of water and flour, the flour coming from one of the 5 grains, or in my view today, we should speak about 6 grains, because I'm adding rye. In other words, we have hita and kusmin, which Rambam writes explicitly at the beginning of Perek Hey, the 5th chapter of Ilchot Hametz U'Matzah, are 2 varieties of wheat, and then we have se'ora, shibolet, shu'al, and chiffon, which Rambam writes explicitly are 3 varieties of barley. And rye is not a variety of barley, and it's actually a separate grain, which was not commonly known or used or grown in eretz yisrael in ancient times, or in this part of the world in general. And therefore, I think, practically speaking, we have actually 6 species of grain that we need to be concerned with. At any rate, hametz is the result of the admixture of flour from one of these grains mixed with water and then allowed to ferment. The fermentation process can be caused either by sourdough, saor in Hebrew, sour, saor, same word of course. It's also called for some reason nowadays mahmeset, which is not really an accurate term. It's not what the word mahmeset means in halachic parlance. Or you can use what's called commercial or baking yeast to cause the dough to rise. That dough having fermented, without discussing now what caused it to ferment, having fermented, that is hametz, and that is hametz gamur. And that is the only thing that is hametz gamur. So hametz gamur is only bread, pasta, different kinds of biscuits and crackers, perhaps, because even not all crackers are even made in such a way. But let's assume for now that all crackers should be considered hametz. Only those things are hametz gamur. Everything else is probably only ta'rovet hametz at most. A mixture, an admixture of chametz with other things, like beer. There's lots of water in beer, so it's not pure chametz. It has chametz in it, and it's mixed with other things, and mainly water. The yeast, baker's yeast, and I stress baker's yeast, in itself is not chametz. The same is true for baking soda, baking powder. These substances are not hametz. Even baker's yeast, the kind of yeast that is used regularly daily to produce bread, is not hametz. It causes the dough to become hametz, but in and of itself it is not hametz. Baking soda and baking powder, even more so, are further removed from hametz because these are simply chemical products which, coming into contact with acids, create a chemical reaction which results in the release of lots of carbon dioxide, which forms bubbles, which causes the thing to rise. But that's not himus, that's not fermentation. This is an artificial kind of rise. That's why in English, such bread that is made using that kind of products, baking soda, baking powder, is called soda bread. It's not really natural fermented bread. So I repeat, baking soda, baking powder, baker's yeast, these things in and of themselves are not hametz. This applies to dry and instant yeast and also to fresh yeast. However, brewer's yeast, I stress again, brewer's yeast, the kind of yeast that is used in the manufacture of beer, is definitely hametz. That is it is that which is skimmed off the top and taken from the process of the malted barley, which is used in the manufacture of beer, for example, and whiskey. And that kind of yeast is most definitely hametz mamash.
Thank you. The second half of Chaim's question was whether they require a hechsher for their use on Pesach.
To the best of my knowledge, they do not require a hechsher on Pesach. I'm not sure whether there are differences between various countries in the possibility of certain things being added to these products, but to the best of my knowledge, these products are not hametz, don't include anything to do with hametz. They're simply chemicals which cause a chemical reaction, the release of carbon dioxide. They do not require hechsher.
Thank you. Chaim, did you have anything to be clarified there?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Harav. We now have a question from Tova Hope Leal in Haifa. It's quite a long question, so I'm just going to summarize it as, is she allowed to allow a non-Jew to use her toaster during Pesach?
Yes, I read the question. I believe I understood the question. And the answer is yes, she may allow a non-Jew to use her toaster for chametz products during Pesach.
Thank you. We now have a question, another question from Chaim Ginsberg. His question is, does one need to kasher a hot plate or plata to use it on Pesach?
One does, but it is not terribly difficult to do so. One uses grease remover and similar cleaning agents to thoroughly clean and remove whatever may be stuck onto these surfaces. That which is stuck and difficult to remove, almost without doubt, is burnt on oil or grease, which is difficult to remove. That's why one should try and why people do use grease removers for this purpose. Having done so, having cleaned it as thoroughly as possible, you should turn it on and leave it on maximum heat for half an hour. And having done so, the hot plate is or the plata is kasher. I do recommend, nevertheless, covering it with foil to be used for use during Pesach.
Okay, thank you. Chaim, anything to be clarified?
If one covers it with foil, then is there less of a concern in terms of getting all the grease off?
I would recommend, nevertheless, endeavoring and being quite diligent in removing grease and other things, within reason, of course. You don't have to scrape it to the point that you make a hole in the metal covering of the hot plate. But I do recommend cleaning it very thoroughly for a number of reasons. For example, because the foil that you will place on the hot plate can easily be a hole can develop, it can be ripped, it can be torn, etc. So it's an extra layer of security, but not in place of cleaning it thoroughly.
Thank you.
But I want to
thank
make it clear, cleaning such a thing thoroughly is not something that should take a whole day or anything of the sort. It is something that should be doable within half an hour at the most.
Right. Thank you. We have a question now from Talia Freitag in Jerusalem. I have two sets of Corelle dishes for eating on, one for meat and one for dairy. There is a machloket about the status of Corelle, if it is considered glass or earthenware, and if it can be kashered. What is the status of Corelle, and can it be kashered during the year as well as for Pesach? I would like to be able to kasher and use them for Pesach.
Very well, a good question. Understood. Oh dear, I want to quote something here. Yes, here I have it. I wish to quote something briefly from an article quite well known that was published in 1994, Minyanam, in the Tradition magazine, which is the Journal of Orthodox Jewish Thought, so it is labeled. The name of the article is Rupture and Reconstruction, the Transformation of Contemporary Orthodoxy by Professor Harav Chaim Soloveitchik. It's a very interesting article, which I highly recommend. I just want to read a few lines. In the introduction, he writes on page 2, he speaks here about the difference between halakha based on texts and what people see and practice based on what they saw in their homes and what the community does. And he speaks about the kosher kitchen. He says, the kosher kitchen with its rigid separation of milk and meat, separate dishes, sinks, dish racks, towels, tablecloths, even separate cupboards. Actually, he writes, little of this has a basis in halakha. For example, tea towels. Once a tea towel is laundered, once it's washed properly, why should it make a difference if it was used to wipe down a fleishig, a meaty dish, or a milchig dish? That's what he means when he says there is little basis for these things in halakha. Strictly speaking, he adds, there is no need for separate sinks, for separate dish towels or cupboards. In fact, if the food is served cold, there is no need for separate dishware altogether. The simple fact is, I still quote, the simple fact is that the traditional Jewish kitchen, transmitted from mother to daughter over generations, has been immeasurably and unrecognizably amplified beyond all halachic requirements. Its classic contours are the product of not of legal exegesis, but of the housewife's religious intuition imparted in kitchen apprenticeship. That is the end of the quote. Now to the question. There may be different opinions about Corelle and Pyrex and the like, but I have a clear view on the subject. I consider Corelle and Pyrex to be gloss, to have the precise halachic definition and status of gloss. I can tell you that exactly 40 years ago, in Tov Shin Mem Beth, 1982 Leminyanam, I was a fairly newly married avrech, and after Tfilat Shaharit in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav, I went up to Hagaon Rabbi Shaul Israeli Zitzal, and I asked him precisely these questions about Corelle dishes and Pyrex dishes and cups, etc. And he said to me, despite the fact that these dishes are made of they're made of glass, and it's true they undergo some special process to make them resilient to heat and what have you. Nevertheless, their halachic status is that of glass, and this is definitely my position as well. And therefore, I say as follows: Al pi adin, one could actually use the same set of Corelle dishes for milchik and fleishig, for meat and milk, all year round. And the same is also true of Pesach, because this is glass. Glass cannot be kasher, does not need to be kashered. It has to be clean, thoroughly clean, yes, but not more than that. Having said that, I agree with the sentiment that Professor Harav Soloveitchik expressed in that article, that there are many things which are commonplace, standard practice in all Orthodox Jewish homes, which are not required according to halacha, not according to any halachic text, but that is the universal practice, and there is some logic and reason, rhyme and reason for these practices. And I do not recommend jettisoning all these practices. I think it is correct that in a household there are two sets of dishes for meat and milk, etc., etc. In the case of this particular question regarding Corelle dishes, they cannot be kasher, and they do not need to be kashered. They are glass. Glass does not absorb. This is stated explicitly in Avot de Rabbi Natan, Kele zechuchit enam bolaim. So it states. Therefore, they can be used for Pesach. They just have to be thoroughly cleaned so that they are truly spotless, squeaky clean, and that's sufficient.
Thank you. Talia, did you have anything to be clarified there?
No, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Arav. We have a question now from Joseph from Yavne. If one made a homemade jam without hametz ingredients, but using a pot and utensils which might have been used with hametz at some point, would the jam be okay to consume on Pesach? The jam has not been opened since it was cooked.
Assuming we are talking about a stainless steel or aluminium pot, and likewise stainless steel or aluminium utensils, assuming that's the case, and assuming they were, that they were completely clean before this jam was made in these dishes, in my view, that jam may be consumed on Pesach.
Thank you. Do we have Joseph here? I don't think so. Okay. Now we have an anonymous question. If a non-chametz item was cooked before Pesach in a non-kosher for Pesach stainless steel pot, and this is a very similar question, in fact, and wooden spoon that's not being kashered, may it be eaten on Pesach? Does it matter if the stirring utensil was a stainless steel spoon or a silicone spatula instead? Also not kashered for Pesach. Does it matter if the food item is just an ingredient used in a larger dish and not the whole dish itself?
To be honest, I'm somewhat confused by this question. it begins by speaking about a non-chametz item. So that's, if we compare it to the previous question, if we're talking about jam, shall we say, that was cooked before Pesach in a non-kosher for Pesach, that is to say a regular pot that's not a Pesach pot, a stainless steel pot, and it says something about a wooden spoon. I assume it means that a wooden spoon was used to stir this item. Now, wood does absorb, not like stainless steel, which essentially does not absorb. So we have to know what the status of this wooden spoon is, and what was it used to stir, and how long before the cooking of this item was it used for something that may have been chametz. So it's very difficult to answer this question. We haven't got really sufficient information. So I repeat what I said before. If some kind of food, some kind of preparation was made in a stainless steel, or I add aluminium pot, using stainless steel or aluminium utensils, which were thoroughly cleaned before this item was made, then similar to the question before, such as jam or anything else of that nature, in my view, it can be consumed on Pesach. But one has to know for a fact that the items in question were thoroughly clean, and there was absolutely nothing, no residue of any kind on them. And one also, with regards to wooden spoons or silicone spatula, etc., this depends on how long before it was used for something that may have been chametz, etc. So there, I cannot be so categorical. I would have to know more.
Okay. Thank you, Harav. Next question is from Chaim in Bruchin. What is the Rav's opinion on eating kosher for Pesach cakes and pastries, etc., that look like hametz? Is this something one is better off avoiding because it is not in the spirit of Pesach? Can we be more lenient with children?
I cannot say that I like the idea. On the other hand, one can also not say that it is asur mishum marit ayin, because people will think that you're eating chametz, because everybody knows today that you have kosher Pesach bread rolls. They look like bread rolls. They're actually made of potato starch, but they're made of bread rolls, and they're made, by the way, with baking powder and baking soda, as we discussed before. I don't think it's asur, but I don't like the idea. I think that Pesach should be a time when everything that we do, or the food that we consume, is clearly, plainly different from the kinds of products that we consume during the year. But that's my subjective position. It's not based on a clear halachic source. With regards to children, if children, are really hankering for something of that sort, I don't think it's something that we need to be too stringent about with children.
Thank you. I don't see Chaim here, so let's move on to the next question, which is from Talia Freitag in Jerusalem. Does every food product need to have a hechsher? For example, single ingredient products that are generally kosher year-round and are not chametz, such as coconut oil, coconut sugar, dry coconut, kitniyot in bins that are open, such as dried legumes, nuts, and almond flour.
Here it depends to a large extent on the specific product, because when it comes to dried products, some dried products are definitely very problematic, because part of the drying process includes flour, and therefore dried fruits, for example, one has to know that they are kasher lePesach, because some dried fruits are quite literally dipped in flour as part of the process of drying, and they come into contact with water and moisture as well. So that needs to be clarified. So I cannot really speak about dried products. I can speak about coconut oil. Coconut oil, I believe, is kasher. It does not. You don't have to imagine or assume that there's a problem with such a product. With regards to kitniyot in bins that are open, I do not believe there's a problem there as well. All kitniyot, however, need to be checked during Pesach, even perhaps more thoroughly than during the year. During the year also, we have to check kitniyot, things like rice and and lentils. We have to check them for the possibility of insects, bugs, or insect eggs that may have been laid and found their way into these bins. That does happen sometimes, and that's true all throughout the year. One has to check for this during Pesach as well, of course, and also for the very, very unlikely possibility, very far-fetched, but nevertheless a remote possibility, that a grain of wheat or barley fell into the bin of rice or lentils or what have you. This is easily checked. If you take a white or clear plate, you put the kitniyot, you put the rice on the plate, and you go through them quite thoroughly, you will immediately see something that stands out, that is different. There is almost no relationship, no similarity between a grain of rice and a grain of wheat. They're very different in size and shape and look and everything. So this is what the Sfaradim who do eat kitniyot on Pesach, this is what they do. Some of them have a minhag of checking kitniyot 3 times. I don't think it has to be checked 3 times. I think it has to be checked once, but thoroughly.
Thank you. Talia, do you have anything to be clarified?
Yeah, actually just one question. That totally makes sense what you're saying. I also have like this bottle of sunflower oil that's unopened, and it has an OU hechsher on it. It does not say anything about it being processed with anything else on any other, equipment with anything else. And I was wondering, would it be okay for me to use it to make my own mayonnaise during Pesach?
I assume that it is all right, but when it comes to things like, as I said before about vinegar, the same is true of oils. Any kind of oil should be available with a hechsher for Pesach. If you have a bottle, even if it's unopened, it doesn't say kasher or Pesach, one doesn't know exactly where it was produced and with what machinery. One can put it aside and use it after Pesach, and one can buy one bottle of oil, which does have a hechsher for Pesach, to use during Pesach. I think that's what I recommend.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question was anonymous. To bake matzah, I would like to place baking stones on top of the barbecue grill that is used all year. A, will I need to kasher the grill for Pesach, and how would I do this? And B, will my matzah be considered basari and I won't be able to eat them with halavi foods?
A barbecue grill can be made kasher for Pesach. One would have to use either, again, grease remover and similar substances, which are quite caustic, and you have to be careful when you use them. And having done that, you would have to turn on the grill and keep it at maximum temperature for half an hour. Another method of cleaning such things is to use those devices which heat up water and then they have a nozzle which shoots out steam at pressure. So it's extremely hot, and the steam is released from a nozzle with a very small aperture. It comes out of pressure, and this melts dirt and grease and everything before your eyes, quite literally. I imagine you are familiar with the kind of device to which I refer. These are excellent devices for cleaning all sorts of things, and certainly for things like barbecues. So you can kasher a barbecue. Having done so using these materials, either that steam device or grease removers and other cleaning agents, and having turned it on, and of course making sure it's everything thoroughly clean, and having turned it on to maximum temperature and keeping it at maximum temperature for half an hour, then the barbecue is kasher Pesach. Now, if you place on top of that baking stones, which are also kasher or Pesach, which can also be, they can also, if necessary, be cleaned using that device or those substances if necessary. And then, of course, any hametz that may have been there will, of course, now be nifsal me'achilat kelev, is totally inedible and in fact poisonous. And then rinsing it off thoroughly and then heating it up, etc. All that is now kasher, Pesach. At that point, you can make matzah on this device, on this barbecue, and the bread, or rather the matzah, which is also bread, is just unleavened bread. The matzah is kasher, and it's not basari, and it's not halavi. It can be eaten with any kind of food.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is from Simcha Friedman in Los Angeles. Does the addition of additives such as oil, eggs, or honey affect the rate at which a dough ferments and becomes chametz? And if so, what is the time limit for making matzah ashira?
Very interesting and also very ancient question. First of all, it's relevant here to mention something else which is not mentioned in this question, which is salt. It does not state anywhere in Chazal, in the Mishnah, the Talmud, and any Baraita that one may not add salt to the dough of matzah. I think it is obvious that one may do so. Certain Rishonim raised the possibility that salt may possibly, they didn't say they know that this to be the case, they said maybe salt increases the rate of himutz, it speeds up the process of fermentation, and therefore they refrained from using salt in the dough from which one makes matzah. However, the fact of the matter is that salt does quite the opposite. It in fact slows down. It does not arrest the process of fermentation, but it does slow it down and it regulates the process. Anyone who is familiar with baking bread knows this. Any baker worth his salt, so to speak, knows this, that salt slows down the process of fermentation and regulates it. If you put together a dough without salt and you let it sit around, even with a slow fermentation agent like sourdough, for several hours without adding salt, it will rise very, very impressively, but it won't be. But the result will not be such a good one. Salt is very necessary, both for the flavor, but also to regulate the process. That's with regards to salt, and that's why I do use salt in my dough when I bake matzah, and I recommend it because I have no doubt whatever that it does not speed up the process. In fact, it does the opposite. With regards to eggs, there is no proof at all from Chazal, again, that eggs speed up the process at all. Rashi, it is reported by his Talmidim, by the students of Rashi, that Rashi said, I do not know if there's a reason to be concerned with adding eggs to the dough of matzah dough, because we see that it does the final result is a bit more puffy than matzah dough without, which does not include eggs. So Rashi said, that's what Rashi said. Rabbeinu Tam and other Rishonim state clearly that eggs do not speed up the process, and I believe that is to be the case. The fact that we see it has a different texture is true because there's a different ingredient in here added to the dough, and it does have an impact on the texture of the matzah, but it does not increase the rate. There is no proof at all that it increases the rate of fermentation. With regards to oil and honey, it seems that at least some of the Tanaim were of the impression that these things perhaps do speed up the rate of himutz. Having said that, another point that has to be made here, it's relevant to this question, is that I do not consider the usual figure of 18 minutes that is quoted which also appears in the Shulchan Aruch, one must state plainly. That figure of 18 minutes being the upper limit for himutz. In other words, if you take a dough, which is an admixture of flour and water, and let it sit around for 18 minutes, at that moment, you have to consider it to be possibly chametz. I consider that to be a mistake. I've explained in the past why, and I won't go into all the details now. I think the real figure is not 1 meal, but 4 meal, as stated explicitly in the Talmud Yerushalmi, and also in some versions of the Talmud Bavli, in some nusach. The statement that it is 1 meal is absent, which is correct. It should be absent. It doesn't belong there. It is wrong. It speaks about the distance from Tiberia to Migdal Nunaya, which is not 1 meal. We know exactly how much it is. It is 4 Roman miles, which is 6 kilometers. And that's exactly the distance today from the Byzantine wall of Tiberia to Migdal, the ancient Migdal. No surprise there. And so again, without going into further detail, the time, in my view, for hivus is 45 minutes, which is a far cry from 18 minutes. So that gives you plenty of time to add oil or eggs or honey or anything at all, wine into the dough, and to produce matzah. And as long as you are kneading it and working with it, it cannot become chametz. So I do not think there's any reason to refrain from baking matzah shira, and the 18-minute time frame is simply, I believe, based on error, textual error, and other misunderstandings, and therefore I don't think there's any reason that one cannot make matzah shira. One doesn't have to do it in a panic. One doesn't have to have it done in record time, as long as one does it in a normal fashion and one doesn't leave the dough lying around without acetic, without being worked or kneaded. There should be no problem at all.
Thank you, Harav. One of the Q&As last year, the Rav answered a question about matzah shira, but I think it was more about the type that looks like a biscuit, a cookie.
Mm-hmm.
Does the Rav have a view on matzah shira that looks like asal matzah, an egg matzah, and whether there's any reason to be concerned about buying that in the shops?
I do not think there's a reason to be concerned. I think one can purchase it and one can eat it. And matzah shira, even eretz Pesach, is mutar.
Thank you, Harav. That completes all the questions on the issue of chametz and matzah. We've now got some questions about Leil HaSeder. This is from Chaim in Bruchin. Aside from the obvious Korban Pesach, what would a typical Leil HaSeder be like according to Minhag Eretz Yisrael? How would it differ from the usual Seder of Galuth mode Judaism, aside from doing the Seder outside of Israel, outside Eretz Yisrael, of course?
Well, one could really speak for hours about this, I suppose, but we're not going to do that now. One thing I will point out is that the original practice was not to have 3 matzot, but 2 matzot. That is the original practice, as it appears in the Rif and the Rambam, based on the Sugya in Masechet Barachot and Masechet Pesachim. The reason for the minhag of 3 is a long story, quite a convoluted one, and we'll leave that aside for now. So my practice is to use 2 matzot, and we have proof from piyutim written in Eretz Yisrael during the early Gonic period that that's what they used, 2 matzot and not 3. I imagine it goes without saying that the practice, the minhag of using horseradish as maror, is incorrect. I imagine everybody knows this. Don't get me wrong. I'm so to speak, a proud Ashkenazi. I like my gefilte fish with the chrein as much as the next person. I think it's very tasty. It's just not maror. So for maror, of course, we use one of the types of maror, which are all types of lettuce that are mentioned in the Mishnah. I can tell you that the other day I was in the supermarket and I purchased endives, olesh in Hebrew. This is a small, I find it very tasty, very mildly bitter lettuce. You do taste a certain slight pleasing bitterness, but not at all very bitter, not difficult to eat at all, quite the opposite. And also it has a red tinge to it, or at least this one does. These ones that I bought do. And I think they're wonderful for the seder, but any romaine lettuce is good because any romaine lettuce has a very mild bitter taste to it, particularly the lower part of the stalk. So that definitely should be used for maror, not chrane, not horseradish. Again, horseradish is delicious, just it's not maror.
Thank you.
What else could I add? I could add that there is a mahaloketh with regards to how much one has to eat for the karpas, the yarakot at the beginning of the seder, whether it should be less than a kazayit or it should be a kazayit. I think that it should be a kazayit, and that is the opinion at least of some of the Geonim and the Rishonim. Those are the main things I would mention. I think that we're going to see a question later about the 4 cups, right? The arba kosos, so we'll mention that later.
Yeah, thank you. Chaim, are you here, and would you like anything clarified? No? Okay, we'll move on to the next question, which was from Daniel in New York. At what degree of severity of an allergic reaction is someone exempt from the relevant miswaf involving eating? Should someone who can take a Benadryl and whose symptoms are not life-threatening do so, or is he exempt?
I imagine we're talking about people with suffer from celiac disease or similar severe allergic conditions to gluten. What I have always said to people regarding this is as follows. First of all, some people who are celiac or otherwise highly allergic purchase matzah made from oats, oat flour, oatmeal. In my view, one does not perform the mitzvah of eating matzah by eating oat matzah made from oatmeal. I don't think it's one of those relevant grains, so I do not recommend that as a solution. What I do recommend is, if a person is capable of ingesting 1 kazayit of matzah, of real matzah, which is either made from a variety of wheat or a variety of barley or rye or spelt, if one is capable of ingesting 1 kazayit, which is 3 cc, not the figures, not the numbers, not the amounts that many people have heard about. 3 cc is a very small amount. It is roughly the size of a piece of soft matzah, shall we say, of the size of a kazayit, of the volume of an olive is literally something the size of your average smallish olive, okay, not more than that. If a person can eat that much matzah without being seriously ill and not suffering serious pain, then he's chayav to do so. He's required to do so, and should not eat any more. One is not required to eat more than that 1 kazayit of matzah, 3 cc. If a person goes without saying, if eating even that small amount, that very almost insignificant amount of matzah is life-threatening, it goes without saying that a person must not do so. And even if it makes a person ill and ill to the point that they have to go and lie down on the couch or in a bed, and they feel very unwell, and they suffer significantly from having ingested even that small amount of matzah, in my view, they are patur. They are exempt from the mitzvah of matzah. Anus rahamana patre. A person who is unable to perform the mitzvah is not have to do so. that is the solution with regards to people who suffer from such conditions. Even if someone can take a medication which ameliorates this condition, the same applies. If a person knows, if I take this medicine, then I can ingest one kazayat of matzah, yes, then you should do so. But if even having taken that medicine, he will feel severe discomfort and be ill and have to, lie down because he's feeling so unwell, he's patur from the mitzvah of matzah.
Thank you, Harav. Daniel, anything to be clarified there?
Is there any benefits to chatzi shiur in this context?
Chatzi shiur of a real kazayat, which is 3 cc, is 1.5 cc. That's such a small amount that I find it difficult to believe that difference would actually be a difference for anybody. If a person can eat 3 cc, I think they're chayav. If they cannot, then they should not do so.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Chaim in Bruchin. How can a type 1 diabetic fulfill the obligation of arba kosov?
I assume the question here is in reference to grape juice, because a person who suffers from such a diabetic condition cannot probably drink grape juice, which is high in glucose. But dry wine does not. All the sugar in a dry wine became alcohol, and I do not see why a person should not be able to drink a cup of dry wine.
Yeah, Chaim clarified to me that he's referring to grape juice.
Yes. Okay. So the answer therefore is, if a person cannot drink any grape juice, doesn't want to drink grape juice, is unable to do so, dry wine is the solution, which should not affect a diabetic person to any significant extent. By the way, the shiur for the arba kosov, which is a revi'it, is 80 cc. 80 cc is also not a very large amount, and rov kos is sufficient. So one doesn't have to drink the whole 80 cc either. One can drink 50 cc, etc. So most people should be able to manage with that.
Thank you.
And again, if there's a person who's, let's say, allergic to anything that comes from grapes and cannot ingest either grape juice or wine, again, such a person is exempt from that particular mitzvah.
Okay, thank you, Harav. The next question is is anonymous. What does the Rav think about different participants reading different parts of the Haggadah while the others remain silent?
I think it is perfectly permissible, and if that's what keeps people awake or keeps them more involved and more interested, I think that's perfectly okay. It's also perfectly okay that the Baal Bayit, the husband, the man of the house, that he reads the whole Haggadah, everyone follows along, but it's also okay to divide up the text if that's what people prefer.
Thank you. We have a question now from David in Jerusalem. During the Seder, while reading the names of the 10 plagues that hit Mitzrayim, many have the minhag to spill a drop of wine after naming each plague. The wine drops are then rinsed thoroughly. Maybe he means the wine cups or the wine plates, maybe, I don't know. And then rinsed thoroughly following some kind of superstition. What is the Rav's opinion on this?
Well, first of all, I can tell you that this is the first time I've heard of this particular superstition. So it just goes to show that there is no end to superstitions. One can always find a new one. I will tell you as follows. It was once pointed out to me in a Haggadah with a Pirush by a certain rabbi who's quite well known in this generation. I will not mention his name, where it was claimed by this rabbi in his commentary that the Abarbanel in his commentary on the Haggadah said that the minhag of of dipping one's finger into the cup or spilling a drop of the cup of wine onto the plate when each of the plagues is mentioned is because we are expressing our chagrin at the death of the Mitzrim, the Egyptians, B'Yam Suf at the Red Sea. As soon as I heard this, it struck me as a very strange statement, and I found it very difficult to believe that Barbanel could have written such a thing. So what I did was I went to the Perush of the Barbanel, which one has to know that there is a shortened version and there's the complete version. So I went to the complete version of the Barbanel's Perush, and I went through it thoroughly, and there is absolutely no such statement. So don't believe everything you read, everything you hear. There is no such statement in the Perush of the Barbanel on the Haggadah. I did look into it further, and I discovered quite the opposite, that in the Maharil, Sefer Maharil, it mentions this minhag, and the reason for the minhag is precisely the opposite, to indicate that Hashem's severe and prolonged punishment of the Egyptians for their treatment of the Jewish people with each of the 10 plagues, and by indicating and stressing each of these plagues individually by dipping our finger into the wine and putting it onto the plate or something, we are stressing because the kos hatar ilah, which is an image in the Nevi'im to do with punishment, we are in fact doing the opposite. We are stressing that they were being punished by Hashem. Either way, this is a minhag which I frankly do not abide by such a minhag. I do not spill wine from my cup. I do not dip my finger into the cup. I don't see the need for such a thing. So it's not something that I do, and everyone can do as they see fit.
Thank you, Harav.
But certainly there's no need to rinse if one did so, one does not have to rinse one's plate. This is some very strange superstition.
Thank you. I don't see David, so let's move on to the next question, which is from Chaim Eckstein in Yerushalayim. I would like to ask for clarification on the karpas, so that the Rav has this evening answered parts of this. Should it be a kazayat or less? I think based on the Rav's opinion that the kazayat is very small, it's hard for it to be less. Also, what about a blessing after the karpas? So I think,
well. Yeah. Essentially, we all basically mentioned this already. I believe that one should eat a kazayit, but a kazayit is a very small amount, so it's just a bite. You can eat as much as you like, but the minimum requirement is a small bite of karpas, of some vegetable. You can eat as much as you like. Having done so, there is a mahloket amongst the Geonim and the Rishonim whether one should make a bracha aharona after having eaten the karpas. Having thought about it for some years, I think that one is not required to do so.
Thank you. Is it reasonable at that stage to, instead of just having sort of a bit of parsley dipped in salt water, to make it into a slightly more substantial dipping course and maybe have 2 or 3 different options? And
it is a perfectly legitimate, and I think even possibly it's an idea which has an upside to it, because often people are hungry at that point, and to have what the Temanim would refer to as a jale, which is to have different kinds of items out on the table at that point, including, it could be different kinds of nuts and raisins and dried fruits. And in other words, what people often have after the meal, one can also have at this point before the meal. It can be vegetable sticks, which you dip in various dips and what have you. All of this is fine. Yes.
So this came up in one of the recent Q&As, but what if one does eat enough to say the bracha after the karpas, and according to the opinion that one does say the bracha, what would the bracha be if one's just had leafy vegetable?
Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, borei nefashot rabot v'hesronon. That's it.
Fine, very well. Thank you. Okay, this is a question from me. So there's a bit of a preamble. I'll just jump to the end. But essentially, which cups of the Arba Kassoth should one say brachot on?
Right. So that's the essential question that you're getting at in this question. And I want to state as follows. First of all, there is a mahaloket amongst the Geonim and amongst the Rishonim whether we make a bracha borei pri hagafen before each of the 4 cups or not. There are a number of opinions. I won't go into all the details. I will tell you the common practice, which is also my practice, which is also many Rishonim, including the Rambam, as I understand the Rambam. The Rambam says explicitly that you make a bracha borei pri hagafen on the first course, which is kiddush, and on the second course. He says explicitly you make a bracha. With regards to the third and the fourth, he doesn't say so explicitly, but I think it follows. If you say in the second, then you also say in the third, and you also say in the fourth. A bracha before. But as for a bracha afterwards, that's a separate discussion. The view of the read is that there's no question that one has to make a bracha on each of the 4 cups. Each one of the Arba Kosot requires its own bracha. The read is of the opinion that one also should make a bracha after each of those 4 kosot. I think it's possible to follow that opinion, but I don't think it's required. My practice is to say a bracha before each of the Arba kosot, but not after each of the Arba kosot, only at the end of the seder to make a bracha.
And on a regular Shabbat or Yom Tov, if one benches kos, and it's a Birkat Yayin on after Birkat Hamazon, it sounds like Rav holds that one should say a bracha on that.
You're talking about bracha before the cup or after the kos?
After the kos that one says after Birkat Hamazon.
That is my minhag. And regarding the perush of Yididia Rav Yoshua Buch, I would want to look into the whole discussion further, but it is my practice. I recall this is what the Rosh writes explicitly, and others, that one does make a bracha on the kos at the end of Birkat Hamazon. Yes.
Thank you. The next question was also from me. The Bavli in Pesachim 107a says one must drink a malo lugma of wine in order to fulfill one's obligation for kiddush. However, it does not give a time limit, and I believe there is a machloket what the time limit is. What is the Rav's view? For the 4 cups, may one sip less than this amount immediately after the bracha and keep on sipping for a while, as people normally would when drinking dry red wine?
Yes, I think that is permissible. One doesn't have to swallow it all in one go or 2 gulps. So one can drink it over several minutes. Yes, there's no clear time limit. Right.
So even the first kind of drinking can be less than Malon Lugma.
Yes, but I don't think one should stretch it out for an hour. But if one drinks that amount over a period of, shall we say, 10 minutes, that's fine.
And that would apply equally to Kiddush all year round?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Chaim in Buchin. Should a 5th cup be poured for Hallel Hagadol?
The 5th cup is not mentioned by Chazal in the Mishnah or in the Talmud. It is mentioned for the first time in certain Gaonic sources. The source of this idea is not very clear. Rambam writes that it is a reshut, it's something you may do, but you are not required to do. So the question is, should you? No, you don't have to. May you? Yes, you most certainly may.
Thank you. And on the previous question, someone asked in the chat whether the cup, whether one should or has to fill the cup up full, or whether one can only put a revi'it into it.
If you have a cup which is
larger than the revi'it,
greater than the revi'it,
yes,
the course has to be full, but you don't have to drink more than a revi'it If it's a very large cup, then you can drink less, and you can then top it up.
Thank you. We now have an anonymous question. May one eat roasted meat at the Seder?
The general minhag, as this is discussed already in the Mishnah and Masechet Pesachim, but the general minhag is not to eat sali, not to eat roasted meat, barbecued meat at the Seder.
Right. Thank you. The next question is from Lewis Gordon. In fact, those are all the questions about Leila Seder. So we've got a few now about Yom Tov, Chol HaMoed. Can you shave for Chag HaPesach if you are within your shloshim? And what about for Yom haAtzma'ut?
No, one does not do so.
Thank you. And anonymous question, what items may one carry on Yamim Tovim? This is presumably in a Rosh Hashanah, or a place where one cannot carry on Shabbat.
The halacha is that kevan shehutra lesorech, hutra shegam shelo lesorech. You're allowed to carry anything that you wish to carry on Yom Tov.
Thank you. Question, another anonymous one. Can I go shopping on Chol HaMoed if I enjoy it, meaning for pleasure and not for business?
It is mutar to go shopping on Chol HaMoed. I do not know if it is the ideal activity for Chol HaMoed, but it's certainly not asur. If one enjoys doing so, one has something that one would like to buy, makes one feel happy, good. One can buy it on Chol HaMoed. That is true. I would just remind all of us, including myself, that it says in the Talmud Yerushalmi that melacha was prohibited during Chol HaMoed kadesh lo ne'esra melacha b'Chol HaMoed ela kadesh ya'asku b'Torah. So it is a perfect time to top up and recharge our battery spiritually, the Hag and then Chol HaMoed. We should keep that in mind also.
Great, thank you. And the final submitted question was also from me. On Chol HaMoed, is it acceptable to go to shul wearing tefillin shel yad hidden under one's sleeve, and then put on tefillin shel rosh on returning home? Is there a problem of saying Shema and Amidah without tefillin shel rosh? And is it better to put on the shel yad and shel rosh together before shul, to say both brachot together and then remove the shel rosh? I would prefer to attend all of shul rather than davening at home and then going to shul for the Chazar Pashas.
There is no problem whatsoever in wearing the tefillah shel yad without the tefillah shel rosh. Such a possibility is discussed by Hazal explicitly in certain circumstances. It appears in the Baraitot in Masechet Tefillin, for example. And just as it is mutar there for a person who is working, doing his job, and he can wear the shel yad and not the shel rosh, or the other way around, similarly here it is mutar to do so because one is unable to do otherwise because of the widespread custom of not wearing tefillin on Chol HaMoed. So it is definitely mutar to go to shul wearing it under your sleeve, to recite Shema, tefillah, etc. No question is mutar. Is it better to put on the shel yad and shel rosh together before going to shul? I don't know if it's better. It's certainly possible. But if one puts on the shel rosh and goes to shul and comes back from shul, then put on the shel rosh when the shel yad is still on, it is also acceptable.
Right. If one were to weigh up the options, so either doing what I just described or saying a Shema and Amidah at home with both tefillot on, and then going to shul for Chazal Tashatz and not wearing tefillah for the rest of tefillah, which of those is the more l'chachila option?
I think that the ideal really would be if one is able to put on tefillin, talith, tefillin, etc. Daven with Henesa Hama, with the sunrise, if that's feasible. And having done so, one can remove the shel rosh and then go to shul. One doesn't have to show up only for Chazarat Hashatz. Assuming that they start davening later, you can get there at the very beginning. You can you may have davened part of the tefillah, so you can learn some mishnayot. You can learn a perik in the Tanakh. You can learn and do whatever you are able to do, and join them for the rest of tefillah. That would be the ideal. Is it better to, if the other option is to daven with the shel rosh till the end of till the end of the tefillah b'lachash, and then take off the shel rosh and go to shul from Chazarat Hashatz onwards? I would say that's probably preferable. Yes.
Thank you. And if one does say all tefillah without tefillin shel rosh and then gets home and puts on tefillin shel rosh, should one say Kriyat Shema, obviously without the brachot, once one's put it on, or is that not necessary?
It's a good idea but it's sufficient to recite the first perek of Shema, having put on the shel rosh.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Rav.
I think Eli Shofet wrote something about the Rambam, about roast meat, etc. It's true, the Rambam is simply quoting the Mishnah, but I referred to the fact that the minhag in all communities, to the best of my knowledge nowadays, in all Eidoth, Sfaradim, Temanim, Ashkenazim, is not to eat basar sali, roasted meat at the Seder. But the Rambam is just quoting the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that there are places where it's done and places where it's not done.
Thank you. We've covered all the questions that were submitted. Does the Rav have time to go through some of the questions that came up in the chat quickly?
Let us try to do so. Yes.
Thank you. So the first one was someone asked about on first day Pesach, what is the correct time to switch from saying Geshem to Tal? Particularly, I think this particularly comes up if one's not davening, if one's davening with Bichiduth. When is the right time to switch? At Musaf or
here there is no reason to change from the regular practice. In other words, the switch is done at Musaf. What we discussed in the past, not with regards to Pesach, with regards to Sukkot, and beginning saying Mashiv Haruah Hamrit Gashem from Shmini Aseret onwards, that does not apply to Pesach. That's a separate discussion, of course, which doesn't have any application to Pesach. So the first day at Musaf, whether you're in a Beth Knesset or not, that's when you switch.
Okay, thank you. And then another thing that came up was, let me see. I think, can one bake matzah using an electric stove instead of a gas stove?
An electric stove. What do we mean exactly by an electric stove?
I think that's what electric circles. Is that right, Chaim?
Electrical rings.
Yeah, Chaim, is that correct?
Well, it doesn't make a difference what the source of the heat is, as long as it gets sufficiently hot. I assume we're talking about baking a matzah as I do. In other words, having rolled out the matzah to the requisite thickness, which is not it shouldn't be too thick. It should be quite thin. One places it on the hot surface of the dry frying pan on top, or a skillet on top of the source of heat, whether it's a gas flame or an electric element, and it bakes within 1 to 2 minutes on each side. It'll be baked.
Thank you. And Eli Shofet, did you have something to be clarified about one of those questions?
Persians have a minhag before Dayenu to hit each other with scallions and onions. Are we allowed to do that, or is it considered wasteful if we eat it after?
Why? I'm curious. Why would people strike each other with scallions or onions?
The origin of the custom is unclear, but it's to symbolize getting hit by the Egyptians. I'm not too sure why it's before Dayenu.
Okay.
But it's pretty fun, and we eat the scallions and green onions afterwards.
If they are consumed afterwards, if they don't become disqualified for consumption, by this practice, then I think it's mutar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rav.
Thank you very much, Rav. I think we're all very grateful.
It is asur in general to take food, to use food which is fit for consumption, and to do something with it which causes it to become unfit now for consumption. Therefore, now it can only be thrown away. That is asur, no matter what kind of food we're discussing. As long as the items you mentioned remain edible, I think it's fine. I was pleased to be with you all, and I hope that we covered everything to everyone's satisfaction. I would like to end with the following thought. The two mitzvot that are min Torah that we are able to perform on Leila Seder at the present time, as long as we have not yet got our act together, we don't have a Beth Mikdash, we don't have a Korban Pesach, the two mitzvot min Torah that we are able to perform is A, eating a kazayat of matzah, because maror is only min Torah when we have a Korban, and this Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, relating, discussing, and delving into all things connected to Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, understanding the Pesukim and the statements of the Chachamim in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, in the various commentaries, discussing these things and understanding what the Haggadah says and why it says this. And I highly recommend the Haggadah Brura of our friend and colleague Rabbi Gabriel, and whatever Perush, whatever commentary clarifies things. This is a very important aspect of the Seder and of Chag HaMatzot, and it is a mitzvah min Torah at all times, in all generations, including the present one. So one should place the requisite emphasis on this mitzvah as well. It's not all about eating and drinking. All right?
Thank you very much, Rav. We're very grateful to the Rav for answering all our questions, giving up his time, and we're wishing everyone a Chag Sameach.
Kol tov, shalom, shalom. Hisku v'yames levavchem kol ha'meyachalin Adonai.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael, or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.